Number 17. Katherine Mahoney. When 19-year-old Katherine Mahoney's British boyfriend Ben Cabell tried ending their relationship in March 2018, the Fairfield University student and amateur swimsuit model allegedly punched him in the face and stomach. Cabell, who played rugby for the same university, told Fairfield, Connecticut police that he initially tried to stop the attack by grabbing Katherine's shoulders, but ended up seeking refuge in a friend's dorm. He then went to the hospital for treatment for his broken and bloody nose. Police initially charged Katherine with third-degree assault and disorderly charges, but the assault charge was upgraded to a felony second-degree level several weeks later. Katherine's attorney, Frank Riccio II, told the press that he was confident the case would be resolved in her favor, and as it turned out, he was right. In December 2018, 8 months after Katherine's arrest, the case against his client was dropped, leaving her free to continue with her studies and carry on with her life as she pleased. In an email to the Daily Mail, Riccio explained that the court dismissed the charges after considering all the facts and circumstances surrounding the matter. He said that Katherine planned to focus on her education and that she was at the top of her class with a bright future ahead of her. Number 16. Madison Rogers. After placing among the top 5 contestants in the Miss Hooters Tennessee competition in 2019, 21-year-old Madison Rogers made headlines for a vastly different and far less flattering reason. In late May of that year, she was arrested for allegedly destroying the Nashville home of her boyfriend of 2 years, shortly after he broke up with her. The man told police that he had ended the relationship earlier that day and had just gotten home when he heard pounding on his front door. As he went to answer it, Rogers allegedly kicked it open and attacked him. The victim said he physically restrained Rogers and took her outside, then dialed 911. By the time police arrived, Rogers had fled the scene, with a parting comment asking him if he liked his upstairs. When the man went inside, he discovered that his bedroom, bathroom, and closet had been destroyed. Security footage reportedly caught Rogers entering the home before he arrived. Police arrested Rogers about a week after the incident. The judge overseeing the case approved a deferred judgment, which allowed Rogers to walk away without a conviction, as long as she followed certain rules put forth by the court over a year-long period. She fulfilled her obligations, and the case was dropped. Number 15. Edie Diaz-Abacana. Late one night in August 2023, police responded to a call about a fire alarm going off at an apartment in Peabody, Massachusetts. They arrived to find a woman outside with a burn wound to her foot. The woman told officers that her daughter's boyfriend, 39-year-old Edie Diaz-Abacana, had set the apartment on fire in an attempt to kill them both. Upon entering the building, police encountered Edie's girlfriend, who was also suffering from burns to her feet. According to law enforcement, the woman had told Edie that she broke up with him earlier that night. Edie allegedly returned to the building while she was sleeping, set her bed ablaze, struck the woman repeatedly in the face, and tried to stop her from leaving, telling her that they were going to die together. The victim's mother tried to help her daughter, but was reportedly attacked by Edie. She escaped and alerted a neighbor, who called the police. Edie's ex-girlfriend had just managed to flee the apartment when she crossed paths with the responding officer, who found her in the building's lobby. Inside the apartment, an officer found a 5-gallon gas can and a blowtorch. Meanwhile, firefighters extinguished the flames and deemed the building unsafe for its occupants. Edie faces multiple charges, including arson, attempted murder, domestic assault and battery on a household member, and kidnapping. He pleaded not guilty and is reportedly being held without bail pending the outcome of his case. In the meantime, he has been ordered to have no contact with the victims. Number 14. Dax Rodriguez. 52-year-old Dax Rodriguez had already served 19 years in prison for murder and had numerous other convictions under his belt when he was accused of kidnapping and carjacking people in Brevard County, Florida, following a recent breakup. According to authorities, Rodriguez entered his ex-girlfriend's garage in May 2023 and attempted to abduct her at gunpoint. The violent act came shortly after the woman ended the relationship. As he struggled with his victim, Rodriguez said he planned to kill her, her sister, and her brother-in-law before driving to Seminole County and murdering his ex-wife in a bid to get custody of his children. At the time, he was on an ankle monitor for previous crimes and was banned from seeing his kids via court-issued orders of protection. The woman managed to escape into the house and locked all the doors while Rodriguez allegedly prepared duct tape and cables to bind his victims with. When the suspect tried re-entering the house, the victim fled to a neighbor's residence for help. Shortly thereafter, a 911 call came in about Rodriguez approaching a man who was working in his yard and demanding his car keys and cell phone at gunpoint. The man handed over the belongings and Rodriguez sped off in his Toyota RAV4. A harrowing police chase ensued, at times reaching speeds of over 100 miles per hour, as Rodriguez successfully dodged 2 sets of spike strips. A cop finally ended the chase by striking the RAV4, causing it to roll several times. The SUV came to rest sitting upright, and Rodriguez continued to resist being taken into custody before finally obeying police commands and surrendering peacefully. Brevard County Sheriff Wayne Ivey said that he believed Rodriguez planned to kill all 4 of his intended victims, and that law enforcement had successfully thwarted a quadruple murder. Rodriguez was booked into custody on a litany of charges, including armed burglary, kidnapping, violating probation, fleeing and attempting to elude, criminal mischief, aggravated assault, domestic violence with a deadly weapon, vehicle theft, and gun theft. He's being held without bond at the Brevard County Jail, pending the outcome of his case. Number 13. Michael Lane and Shana Grice. 19-year-old Shana Grice and 27-year-old Michael Lane met at their workplace and began dating in 2015. But it didn't last long, and when Shana decided to end things, Michael refused to accept that the relationship was over. He even said to a friend, "She'll pay for what she's done." In March 2016, Shana went to the police in Sussex, England, and complained that Michael had pulled her hair and tried taking her cell phone. When asked about the situation, Michael managed to procure text messages that made it seem as though Shana still wanted to be in the relationship. The police ultimately concluded that Shana had wasted their time and fined her for filing a false report. Unfortunately, they were wrong with their assessment about who was being truthful, and over the following months, Michael stalked Shana relentlessly. He harassed and physically followed Shana, called her and breathed heavily into the receiver without saying anything, and snuck inside her house at night to watch her sleep. In August 2016, 5 months after Shana tried complaining to the police and was penalized for it, she saw Michael standing outside her home. Her existence had become a living nightmare due to Michael's constant torment, but she didn't call the police. She didn't think they would believe her, since they didn't before. Just weeks later, Michael staked himself out near Shana's home and waited until she was there alone. He then went inside, fatally slit her throat and set her bedroom on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. During questioning, he initially denied being at the scene, then admitted it, but claimed he found Shana dead and didn't report it because he was afraid of being accused of murdering her. Finally, however, law enforcement believed Michael was guilty and arrested him for Shana's murder. In court, he admitted to stalking his ex-girlfriend but denied killing her. The jury nevertheless convicted him of the crime, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years behind bars. For Shana's family, who believed Shana would still be alive if the police had believed her when she complained, justice came in vain. The judge overseeing the case also criticized law enforcement for their handling of the stalking case and even accused the cops of stereotyping Shana. To make matters even more disturbing, a subsequent investigation found that Michael had harassed over a dozen girls and women between 2006 and 2016. He also had a history of being controlling in at least one other past relationship. Following the court case, the Sussex police decided that they will no longer fine people who file domestic abuse complaints. Number 12. Carlos Asencio and Amanda Dabrowski. The relationship between co-workers Amanda Dabrowski and Carlos Asencio was over nearly as quickly as it began, with the pair breaking up after just 3 months of dating in 2018. Unwilling to accept that the relationship was over, Carlos began stalking Amanda via a tracking device that he attached to her car. In April 2019, he broke into Amanda's home in Aya, Massachusetts, attacked her with a stun gun, and then fled the country. Amanda managed to fight back and save herself during what many believed was an attempt on her life. Upon Carlos's return to the US, he was arrested and ultimately convicted of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Just a few months later, in July 2019, Carlos stalked Amanda to a book club meeting at a restaurant in Worcester, Massachusetts. He entered the restaurant shortly before 8 p.m. and attacked her with 2 large knives as she was leaving the bathroom, stabbing her at least 58 times. Carlos was charged with Amanda's murder, but the trial was delayed repeatedly due to his mental health. In 2019, he was found incompetent to stand trial, but it was later determined that his mental health had been restored to competency. Prosecutors argued that Carlos killed Amanda for revenge for ending their relationship and because he lost his job and became homeless after the breakup. The defense did not deny that Carlos killed Amanda, but claimed that he was having a psychotic episode and chalked the crime up to a mental health tragedy. After just hours of deliberating, the jury found Carlos Asencio guilty of first-degree murder and assault, as well as an assault and battery with a dangerous weapon charge for his actions against a bystander on the day of the murder. Number 11. Dwayne Johnson. A Tennessee woman's life probably flashed before her eyes when someone fired 3 gunshots into her Chattanooga apartment one afternoon in May of 2023 while her young children were in the home. She later told police that when she looked out her window after hearing the shots, she saw her ex-boyfriend, 31-year-old Dwayne "Marsky" Johnson, fleeing the property on foot. 2 of the bullets pierced a bedroom window and an interior wall, but thankfully nobody was hurt. According to police, Johnson was also captured on surveillance footage as he ran away from the building. The victim positively identified him as her ex-boyfriend in the video and revealed that she had broken up with Johnson just 3 days earlier because she planned to get back together with the father of her children. Ever since the breakup, Johnson had allegedly acted very upset toward the woman. He was also accused of knowingly firing the shots into the woman's windows, given his prior knowledge of the location and layout of her apartment. Johnson was charged with attempted first-degree murder, reckless endangerment, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, and 3 counts of aggravated assault. Number 10. Angel Alvarez and Margarita Morhead. While responding to a reported disturbance at an apartment building in Chelsea, Massachusetts one morning in May 2023, emergency personnel found 59-year-old Margarita Morhead unresponsive and clinging to life in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds. The woman was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she died from her injuries later that day. No suspects had been taken into custody when news of Margarita's murder broke, leaving community members feeling worried that they were possibly in danger. Neighbor Pamela Rivera told local station WCVB that she planned to put things in front of her door to block a potential intruder, just in case Margarita's killer was still lurking in the area and had plans to take a second victim. While police initially remained tight-lipped about the situation, the building's manager told the press that the killing was an isolated domestic incident. Margarita's ex-boyfriend, 65-year-old Angel T. Alvarez, soon turned himself in to authorities and admitted to punching and stabbing the victim. He reportedly told investigators that he attacked Margarita because she broke up with him. According to law enforcement, Alvarez bought a new cell phone and threw out his bloody clothes after the stabbing. Alvarez and Morhead reportedly dated for a long time, leading up to Margarita's death. At the time, there was an active restraining order between the 2 parties, but they had apparently continued to see each other in the time leading up to Margarita's murder. In an affidavit, Margarita wrote that Alvarez called her constantly, to the point of not letting her sleep. She also accused him of saying vulgar and hurtful things. Alvarez faces charges of first-degree murder and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. He remains held without bail, pending the outcome of his case. Number 9. Javon Gilbert and Emishay Kirby. 29-year-old Emishay Kirby vanished in September 2020 after she was last seen walking in West Houston, Texas. Her body was found in a field near a public park weeks later, following an extensive search. The investigation led police to Emishay's ex-boyfriend, 31-year-old Javon Gilbert, whom the victim had broken up with shortly before her murder. At one point, the couple had lived together, but they separated when Emishay ended the relationship and accused Javon of assaulting her. But Javon was apparently unwilling to accept that the relationship was over, according to one witness, who claimed that he broke into Emishay's apartment, stood over her with a knife, and refused to release her. A review of text messages that were exchanged between the pair shortly before Emishay's disappearance revealed that the young woman had expressed feeling afraid of her ex to which Javon responded that he wouldn't hurt her. Surveillance footage, cell phone data, location records, and other evidence helped investigators identify inconsistencies in Javon's story and further connected him to Emiche's murder. In one security video, he was seen struggling to carry a heavy object to Emiche's car and placing it in the trunk during the early morning hours, leading detectives to believe he killed her inside the apartment before dumping her body. Following the discovery of Emiche's remains, Javon was charged with murder, but it was a previous crime that would ultimately land him with a life sentence behind bars. Back in 2013, he had been charged with arson for setting his ex-wife's home ablaze while she was inside. He pleaded guilty in 2015 and was given 8 years deferred adjudication probation, which meant that as long as he stayed out of trouble for the designated period of time, he would avoid a conviction and a prison sentence. When Javon was charged with Emiche's murder, the judge overseeing the case revoked his probation and sentenced him to the maximum punishment for first-degree arson, which is life in prison. He'll be required to serve at least 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. Number 8. Kevin Bacon and April Danza. 39-year-old April Danza's neighbors in Woodbridge, New Jersey, knew her as a quiet person who mostly kept to herself and was mainly seen coming and going to and from her marketing job every day. So it understandably came as a shock when police responded to a 911 call in late November 2023 and found her murdered inside her home. A friend or family member had called law enforcement concerned about the woman's well-being and had asked for a welfare check. After breaking down the front door, responding officers found April dead in her bedroom with blunt force injuries to the head. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Surveillance footage from nearby appeared to show a man coming and going from April's apartment several times on the night of her death. He was also seen carrying a grey storage bin into and out of the residence. According to court documents obtained by Patch News, April's loved ones immediately named her recent ex-boyfriend, 46-year-old Kevin Bacon, as her suspected killer. The former couple had been engaged at one point, but April had recently ended the relationship. The license plate of a car that was parked along April Street on the night of the murder was identified as Kevin's, and a person familiar with Kevin identified him as the man in the surveillance footage. When questioned by police, Kevin allegedly claimed the grey storage bin belonged to April and that he had found it inside his home. He denied bringing it to her apartment or leaving with it and abruptly ended the interview and asked for a lawyer. Previous police reports list Kevin as April's ex-fiancé, and records show that Kevin was previously accused of stalking, threatening and harassing April. He faces a first-degree murder charge and is currently being held without bail as he awaits his next court hearing. Number 7. William Tollard and Angela Zigler. On an October morning in 2020, police in Venice, Florida, responded to a call about shots fired at a local bank and discovered the slain body of 40-year-old Angela Zigler in the driver's seat of a Jeep. She had been shot multiple times at close range. Further investigation revealed that just days earlier, Angela had ended her tumultuous relationship with 47-year-old William Tollard. The pair had reportedly dated on and off for about 18 months, leading up to Angela's murder. Witnesses told police that William had pulled up behind Angela's vehicle at the bank drive-thru, trapping her in between his vehicle and a work van that was parked in front of the teller window. Tollard approached the driver's side window of Ziegler's Jeep, and the two briefly exchanged words before Tollard opened fire on the woman. He then approached the passenger side window and fired 2 more shots. Angela's Jeep drifted forward about 100 yards before crashing into a light pole, at which point William parked his vehicle, approached one last time, and fired 2 more shots. Police caught up with William a short distance away. During his arrest, they found a semi-automatic gun, ammunition, and a set of binoculars inside his vehicle. A subsequent search of his phone turned up further evidence of his guilt, including dozens of text messages to Angela, her estranged husband, and other family members. Prosecutors described the murder as a classic case of, if I can't have you, nobody can. In 2023, a jury found Tollard guilty of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without parole in the state of Florida. Number 6. Ariel, Cruz and Adania Campos. After their relationship ended, 21-year-old Adania Campos and 19-year-old Ariel Cruz remained good friends, or so it seemed. Ariel even stayed close with Adania's family, and he was there to console them when the young woman was found murdered inside the trunk of her own car in Houston, Texas, in November 2023. Adania's loved ones had reported her missing earlier that day. They tracked her through her phone's location and were led to her car. Her cell phone could be seen inside the vehicle, but the young woman was nowhere in sight. Because nothing appeared disturbed or suspicious at the scene, and because the family seemed to think that someone had abandoned the car and that Adania was elsewhere, responding officers declined to break into the vehicle. Ariel participated in the search for Adania and seemed every bit as concerned as her loved ones. It wasn't until later that Adania's father smashed her car window and opened the trunk to discover his daughter lying in it, dead. Police noted that there were signs of trauma to Adania's face and that no shell casings were found at the scene, but have declined to elaborate on her cause of death. Nearby resident Jenna Gonzalez told ABC 13 that she gave the family the baseball bat that was used to bust a car window. She said it was instantly obvious that Adania couldn't have survived whatever had happened to her because there was too much blood. Police reports describe Adania as Ariel's girlfriend, but the two apparently were not together at the time of Adania's murder. Ariel allegedly confessed to murdering Adania and told investigators that he did it because she had broken up with him in the past. He now faces a murder charge and remains behind bars on $500,000 bail as he awaits his next court date, which is scheduled for February 2024. Number 5. Joyce Brown Rodriguez and Christopher Wilson. During what began as a normal work shift at a recycling facility in Middletown Township, Pennsylvania in December 2020, 52-year-old father of 9 Christopher Wilson was ambushed and fatally shot by his recent ex-girlfriend's son. According to authorities, 56-year-old Joyce Brown Rodriguez of Philadelphia conspired with her 34-year-old son, Khalil Brown, to murder Wilson. Joyce allegedly drove Khalil to Christopher's workplace where the killing occurred, but the suspects were not charged with the crime until 2022. The relationship between Michael and Joyce reportedly began in 2018, but ended shortly before Christopher's murder. Leading up to the crime, Joyce called and texted Christopher repeatedly and showed up at his workplace, where co-workers witnessed the two arguing. Joyce later told police that she texted Khalil asking for help. He agreed to talk to Christopher, but ended up shooting him instead. Speaking with investigators, Joyce claimed that when Khalil got back to her car, he said he didn't feel like talking to Christopher. In the immediate aftermath of Christopher's murder, Joyce allegedly pretended to grieve with his family. In 2023, Joyce pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. She agreed to testify against Khalil, who was convicted of first-degree murder and is facing life in prison. Number 4. Richard Montano and Fatima Rojas. In a disturbing case of mistaken identity, 40-year-old Sylvia Vaca Abacay was found brutally murdered in a Fairfax County, Virginia apartment building in August 2022. She had been beaten, stabbed, and set on fire. The suspected killer was identified as 48-year-old Richard Montano, and the intended victim was his recent ex-girlfriend, Fatima Rojas, who Vaca Abacay was staying with at the time of her death. According to news reports, Rojas had broken up with Montano just days earlier following a volatile 8-year relationship. Montano was unaware that Vaca Abacay was staying at the apartment and immediately attacked her when she answered the door. A neighbor overheard the woman's anguished screams and dialed 911. Officers arrived to find the apartment on fire, and the medical examiner who performed Vaca Abacay's autopsy counted at least 10 blunt force injuries and 10 stab wounds. Prosecutors claimed that Montano tried covering up the crime by setting Sylvia's body on fire after realizing he had killed the wrong person. During the trial, Rojas testified that Montano was physically abusive during their relationship. She said that whenever she tried breaking up with Montano, he tracked her down and tried wooing his way back into her good graces with flowers and dinner. Rojas took the bait every time, but the last time she broke up with Montano was different. According to her testimony, Montano kept showing up at the apartment. Intent on finally moving on, she followed the advice of police by blocking his phone number and sending him a final warning to leave her alone. Vaca Abacay moved in 2 days later and was dead within weeks. Montano's attorney argued that her client may have been guilty of having a dysfunctional relationship, but that it didn't make him a killer. She also argued that it made sense for investigators to find Montano's DNA at the crime scene, given his past relationship with Via Rojas, and that he would not have mistaken Vaca Abacai for his ex-girlfriend. Unswayed by the defense's argument, a jury found Montano guilty of murder in October 2023. He's scheduled for sentencing in January 2024 and faces a life term. Number 3. Dante McCrae and Kayla ONeal. 31-year-old Kayla ONeal was just weeks away from giving birth in early 2023 when she was shot outside an Amazon warehouse in Lakeville, Minnesota. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed an emergency C-section in an attempt to save her son, Messiah. Sadly, both victims perished. Kayla's ex-fiancé, 32-year-old Dante McCrae, allegedly told investigators that he and Kayla had been fighting most of the day leading up to the shooting because Kayla found out he had a child with another woman and had broken up with him just hours before she was killed. McCrae, who was banned from owning a gun due to his felony record, allegedly gave police several different versions of what happened leading up to Kayla's murder. He eventually admitted to pulling the trigger out of anger when Kayla dropped him off at work, but claimed that he didn't know the gun was loaded. After considering the evidence, authorities charged Dante with second-degree manslaughter and eventually upgraded the charge to second-degree murder. Speaking with CBS News, Kayla's mother, Katina ONeal, said that her daughter wanted nothing to do with Dante after learning about his infidelity. She also said that Kayla planned to give her baby her last name instead of Dante's. On the day of the crime, one of Kayla's children called their grandmother and asked her to come over because Dante was being aggressive with their mother. A witness told detectives that Dante repeatedly threatened Kayla that day and that they had to step in and break up a scuffle between the warring exes, which involved Kayla breaking Dante's phone. During the heated argument, Dante allegedly threatened to kill Kayla if she let another man near his kids and warned her that she isn't bulletproof. In September 2023, Dante McCrae pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 47 years in prison. Number 2. Juan Carlos Mata and Leslie Reyes. Tragedy struck an entire community when a beloved young woman named Leslie Reyes was fatally shot while arriving home from her job in Pasadena, Texas. According to investigators, the 19-year-old's ex-boyfriend, 20-year-old Juan Carlos Mata, waited for hours outside Leslie's apartment complex for her to finish her shift at an auto parts store. Just minutes after she arrived home shortly after midnight, Mata shot her in the head, fired a few rounds into the air, and fled the scene on foot, triggering a widespread manhunt. According to a police spokesperson, the first officers to respond to the call saw Mata walking away, but were too busy trying to save Leslie's life to chase after him. By the time they attempted to pursue Mata, he was nowhere in sight. Leslie was pronounced dead at the scene. Witnesses saw Juan and Leslie talking for a few minutes before shots rang out. Upon hearing the gunfire, Leslie's family rushed outside to find her suffering from 2 bullet wounds. In the meantime, Mata allegedly picked up the young woman's phone when her mother called it and repeatedly apologized for what he had just done. According to police, Leslie and Juan broke up about a month before the shooting. Leslie's sister, Lourdes Martinez, later told local news outlet KHOU that Leslie was sad about the breakup with Mata, but was focused on moving past it. Juan, on the other hand, was unaccepting of the breakup and continued to pursue Leslie by texting her and showing up at her apartment complex. Martinez said that Mata didn't want to see her sister with anyone else. A few days after the murder, an officer responded to a call about a suspicious man lurking around a makeshift memorial to Leslie during the early morning hours. He identified the man as Mata and tried to make contact, but that too ended in tragedy, with Mata dying from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Lazarith Carrillo and Alyssa Perez. During the pre-dawn hours one morning in early 2023, a San Antonio resident found 26-year-old Alyssa Perez and 32-year-old Edward Acosta Jimenez dead with multiple gunshot wounds inside a car near her residence. The woman told police that she didn't recognize the vehicle or the victims. After identifying the victims, investigators spoke with the family of Alyssa Perez, who said that she had never come home after leaving the night before. They also explained that Alyssa had recently broken up with her boyfriend, 18-year-old Lazarith Carrillo, and claimed that Lazarith had recently shot at Alyssa's car after she gave him a ride somewhere. Just hours after the double homicide, Lazarith had been arrested in connection with an unrelated attempted vehicle theft in the same area. According to police, Lazarith pulled a gun on the victim, but fled when the person's friend came outside. Police found Alyssa's phone in his possession while taking him into custody. They also uncovered evidence that Lazarith had communicated with both victims on the day of the murders. The caliber of the shell casings found at the scene matched his gun, and his fingerprints were found on a cup inside the car the victims were discovered in. Lazarith allegedly admitted to knowing Alyssa and Edward, but denied killing them. He nevertheless faces capital murder charges in connection with the crime, and the case appears to be ongoing.
10. Deadly Real Tor. A respected realtor from the Ozarks has gotten busted for getting wrapped up in a murder-for-hire plot. Ann Bauman was arrested for hiring a hitman to kill the mother of her ex-husband. According to documents filed with the Camden County Circuit Court, Ann Bauman's motive for hiring the hitman was simple. She believed her ex-husband's mother was responsible for putting strain on the relationship between her and her daughter. She also thought that the woman was going to be taking her to court to try and get full custody of her children. One day when Bauman went to pick up her children, they refused to go with her. She was forced to leave, at which point she sent them a text saying that their grandmother was going to be dead. When the ex-husband confronted Bauman about the text, she simply said it was because the woman was old and would probably die soon. But in reality, she was actively looking for a hitman. The person Bauman went to look for a contract killer has not been named for their own safety. However, the individual did say that if Bauman was serious, they could find a killer for her. But really, the individual was on the phone with their attorney, trying to figure out how to get this woman arrested. She eventually set up a sting operation. Bauman paid a measly $1,500. The witness then went to the cops, and the rest is history. She's now charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and is sitting in court waiting for her sentencing. 9. Russian Assassin. 34-year-old Tumso Abdurakhmanov is a well-known blogger from Chechnya who amazingly survived an assassination attempt while in Sweden. Tumso was living in Copenhagen when a man appeared at his apartment with a hammer held in one hand. Apparently, the guy with the hammer had flown from Moscow with the express intention of bludgeoning Tumso to death for being vocal about his anti-Putin stance. While Russia has been accused of secretly assassinating a whole lot of people recently, most of these assassinations involve nerve gas or poisoning. This one was just an ordinary guy with a hammer. But here's where the hitman really messed up. He wasn't very good at his job. The blogger, after being hit in the neck several times with a hammer, got the weapon away from the guy. He then bludgeoned the hitman with his own hammer, beating him to within an inch of his life in front of his apartment door. It was a total fail on the part of the hitman. He even admitted that he had been sent from Moscow to take care of Tumso. When the police got to the scene, they discovered the gruesome spectacle of two Russian citizens covered in blood from the vicious battle with a hammer. The bigger man, the man who had broken into Tumso's apartment, had already slipped into unconsciousness. Both were arrested. After 3 days of police questioning, Tumso was reclassified as a crime victim, and the other man, 29-year-old Ruslan Mamiev, was detained on suspicion of attempted murder. 8. The Florida Escort. Dalia Dipolito was sentenced to spend 16 years in prison back in 2017. The sentence came after she was found guilty of soliciting murder. She was recorded on video and audio freely plotting to kill her husband, Michael Dipolito. At the time, she had been married to him for only 6 months. The assassination attempt was in 2009. It took 11 years for her to finally be sentenced. although she did get time served since she had already been locked up that whole time. But let's back it up to when she tried to hire a hitman. Dahlia agreed to pay an undercover officer $7,000 to have her husband knocked off. When asked if she was sure that she wanted him killed, she said she was 5,000% sure. She plotted with the undercover officer to make it look like a burglary gone wrong. Her husband was supposed to be killed while she was out at the gym. How did the undercover officer get involved in all this? Dahlia had originally approached her ex-boyfriend to see if he could source a hitman. Instead of doing that, he went straight to the police, who helped set up the sting operation. 7. Outsourcing. Authorities in China have charged 6 men with crimes of intentional homicide. According to the officials, all 6 individuals had tried outsourcing the killing of one target to another hitman. In other words, one individual hired a hitman to kill somebody, the hitman he hired outsourced the killing to another hitman, and so on and so forth. It went on down the line until 5 hitmen were involved. All 5 of the hitmen were sentenced to spend between 2 and 4 years in prison, while the guy at the top of the pyramid who requested the hit in the first place was given 5 years. The man behind it all is a real estate developer named Tan Hui. In 2013, he decided he wanted to kill his rival developer. It was all about a dispute regarding a development project. Tan paid a man somewhere around $280,000 to complete the job. Now, if you ask us, that sounds like real hitman money. That's the kind of cash that will get you Agent 47 showing up to do the job. The hitman took the money, then used half of it to hire a cheaper hitman. He paid the cheaper hitman only $38,000 up front, with the promise of $71,000 when the job was done. And we keep going down the line. The job was offered to a third man for even less money. It was kicked down the line to the 4th, then finally to the 5th. The very last hitman was promised $14,000 in total to do the job. Through all this outsourcing, the police caught on to the scheme, came cracking down on everybody, and the hit was never carried out. Talk about some seriously lazy killers. 6. The Dark Web Preacher. In Minnesota, a preacher was stuck in a failing marriage. His name is Stephen Allwine, and he was recently on trial for premeditated first-degree murder. The preacher tried to hire a hitman on the dark web using Bitcoin, but his plan fell apart. Unlike most of the other failed murder plots we heard about today, this guy actually took the murder into his own hands. He killed his wife, Amy Allwine, and then tried to make it look like she had killed herself. She was found dead on November 13, 2016. They had been married for decades after originally meeting at a Christian college. They were active church members and had an adopted son together. So what went wrong? Stephen had served as the church elder. He was a deacon, and he even offered marriage counseling. He seemed like a perfectly ordinary guy, but when he learned about the site called Ashley Madison, where people can sign up to have affairs, the Holy Spirit left his body. According to Fox News, the preacher had affairs with at least 2 women. But then when the breach in security caused all the Ashley Madison users to be outed, the preacher decided it was time to kill his wife before she found out about his affairs. Where does a person go when they need a hitman? The dark web. The preacher found a shady hitman on the site and paid him $6,000 in Bitcoin. But then the hitman conveniently vanished, and the preacher was stuck doing the murder himself. Do you know anyone who's ever tried to do something strange on the dark web? Let us know your stories in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. 5. The Doctor and the Hells Angels. A doctor has been accused of hiring the legendary biker gang known as the Hells Angels to get rid of a witness. This witness knew all about the doctor improperly prescribing opioids to his patients. The doctor's name is Anatoly Brailovsky, and he was in some serious hot water because of the allegations against him. While waiting to go on trial for writing fraudulent prescriptions, he turned to the Hells Angels. He asked if they could murder the witness before he had the chance to testify against the doctor. If the one witness is suddenly dead, though, doesn't that make the doctor look even more suspicious? What do you think? But guess what? This time the Hells Angels weren't really feeling like murder. Somebody, we don't know if it was actually one of the Angels, contacted the FBI after the doctor came looking for a killer. The unnamed informant, with help from the FBI, set up a sting operation. He met the FBI agent at the local Home Depot, where in the parking lot they discussed murder. However, this case is a little different. The doctor didn't trust the undercover agent. He never explicitly requested that he commit murder for money. He also never exchanged any money for the service. So now he's facing a kind of gray area crime in which he did seek a hitman, but didn't actually go through with it. Nonetheless, when added to the fraud charges, he's looking at some serious time behind bars. 4. Italian Black Widow. Patricia Reggiani, known to some as the Black Widow, was found guilty of paying a hitman somewhere around $300,000 in 1995 to murder Maurizio Gucci, the heir to a fashion empire. Maurizio had left Patrizia for another woman. Not only that, he was seeing several other women as well. She was so angry that he had betrayed her, and she wanted more than the measly $650,000 that he offered in the divorce settlement. So she went around asking everyone she could if they knew someone who was brave enough to murder her husband. She claims she couldn't aim a gun very well. Otherwise, she would have done it herself. Eventually, she came across a hitman named Benedetto Cirolo, the owner of a pizzeria who was in serious debt. She paid him a huge sum of money to shoot her ex-husband dead, and he did it too. He shot him on the steps of his office in Milan. It was right after he was going to work, with the pizzeria owner appearing out of nowhere and pulling the trigger. But amazingly, even after the pizzeria owner was caught, he kept his mouth shut. It took the police 2 years to finally figure out that it had been Patricia Reggiani who ordered the hit. She ultimately served 18 years in prison, being released in October of 2014. 3. Ranchhand Assassin. An animal rights lawyer recently pled guilty to offering somebody $100,000 to kill her ex-husband's girlfriend. And to make the story even more bizarre, the animal rights attorney sought the help of a simple ranch hand to do the murder. The lawyer's name is Jennifer Emmy, from Evergreen in Colorado. At the time of the murder-for-hire plot, she was locked in a desperate divorce battle with her ex-husband. Jennifer was 43 years old, but her husband, Donnie Emmy, had run away with a significantly younger girl who had been working for them as an au pair. An au pair is someone like a live-in nanny who lives in the house and takes care of the kids and does the chores. Literally every wife's worst nightmare. As you can probably imagine, Jennifer was heartbroken. Her husband ditched her for the younger nanny. Furious and angry, she lost her marbles. She went to a ranch hand that she knew named Timothy Lindsay. Timothy told her it would cost $100,000 to hire a contract killer. They then discussed the killings in detail, with Jennifer having some pretty intense ideas. She wanted the girlfriend to be killed in a car accident, preferably with her ex-husband in the vehicle at the time. But instead of doing it, the ranch hand got in contact with the police. Jennifer was arrested for attempting to hire a hitman, and now she's locked up for good. 2. Insurance fraud. Alex Murdaugh hired a hitman for himself. In a bizarre case of insurance fraud, Alex paid a contract killer to murder him by surprise. That way his family would get the death insurance payout. Now you're probably wondering why on earth a person would do that. Alex had once been an ordinary member of society, but his life spiraled out of control after his wife and son were murdered, and he got horribly addicted to opioids. It didn't help that before that, his son was responsible for a boat accident that saw an innocent woman get killed. Talk about bad luck. Basically, his life went from awesome to garbage. With most of his family dead and only one son alive, Alex was absolutely miserable. He hatched the scheme to be murdered by a hitman so that his only remaining son could collect $10 million from his life insurance policy. That is a huge chunk of money to leave behind as inheritance, but the plot was a failure. The guy that Alex hired to assassinate him refused to do it. Instead of giving his son all that money, Alex is now being brought up on charges of fraud. 1. Hitman Fake Out. Ramon Sosa from Houston, Texas was almost killed by his wife when she hired a hitman to take him out. And to add insult to injury, his wife had actually hired a former client of Ramon's to do the job for a measly $2,000. The story goes back to 2013, when Ramon's wife, Lulu, was granted U.S. citizenship and moved from Mexico City to Texas. But for one reason or another, she didn't really like her husband. She was amazing while they were dating, then became a completely different person once she was in the country. Ramon became aware of her plot to murder him after a friend of his told on her. His friend, an ex-gang member, was the one Lulu had gone to offer the $2,000. The pair took their evidence to the police, who then helped Ramon fake his own death. They staged a photo shoot in which Ramon lay in a grave with a fake bullet hole in the center of his head, appearing dead as a doornail. Next, Ramon went into hiding for 3 days. When an undercover FBI agent made contact with Lulu, he showed her the photos of her supposedly dead husband. She simply laughed. It was clear she had been trying to murder him, and so she was arrested. She's currently serving 20 years in an American jail.
Number 10. The first homicide of 2022. New York City had its first homicide of 2022 when a woman was stabbed to death in Queens. It happened on January 1st when an unidentified woman was discovered lying on the sidewalk near Broadway in Astoria with several stab wounds. She died after being brought to the hospital, but the circumstances around her death remain a complete mystery. There were no witnesses, there are no suspects, and not even the victim has been properly identified yet. But here's where things get really alarming. The first homicide of 2022 was in the early morning hours of the first day of the year. This doesn't bode well for the next 12 months. According to the New York Post, 2021 recorded 485 murders. That was a sharp increase from the murders seen in 2020. If the city continues to experience murder at such an alarming rate, 2022 will be a bloody time for the city. And although 485 does feel like a lot of murder for one city, it's nothing compared to the 1990s. In the first year of that decade, there were 2,245 murders recorded in just 365 days. New York City was a literal battleground in the 90s, and the number of homicides has dropped off significantly since then. Even though it may seem wildly dangerous from the outside, it's way better than it used to be. In 1990, there were 6.15 murders each day. Number 9. Run over in the Bronx. Molly Pearson, a 24-year-old from New York City, was run over by a box truck in Brooklyn. She was riding a moped at about 11 o'clock in the morning when the box truck came roaring through an intersection of Meeker and Skillman and drove over her like she was a squirrel hopping across the road. According to the police investigation, both the truck driver and the young woman were turning right at the same time, but the truck was way bigger than Molly's scooter, and it swept her underneath it. The driver didn't even realize what was happening until he was already running the woman over and crushing her bones with his truck's huge tires. Paramedics arrived on the scene as quickly as possible. Molly was rushed to the hospital, but there was nothing doctors could do to save her. The weight of the truck rolling over her and her moped was just too great. She was like a tree branch thrown into a series of crunching gears. As for the driver, no arrest has been made yet. It seems to have been an accident, but really highlights how horribly dangerous driving in the big city can be. Number 8. The Jugger Predator. Chanel Lewis was only 22 years old when he killed New York jogger Karina Vetrano. As Karina was jogging along a park trail near her home in Howard Beach, Queens, Chanel snuck up behind her and took her life. He has now finally been sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, with no possibility of parole. But it took 2 dramatic trials for his sentence to finally be passed down. One of the major problems was that Lewis continued to say that he was innocent and never deviated from his story. The first trial ended in a hung jury, so they had to have a whole new trial. But this time, it only took 5 hours for the jury to get on board and convict this guy of murder and sexual assault. Karina was a speech pathologist. She left her home just after 5:30 in the evening to go for a usual jog along Spring Creek Park. Surveillance footage caught her running down the road, but that was the last time she was ever seen alive. Minutes later, she was punched in the face, dragged through a thick tangle of weeds, violently assaulted, and then strangled to death. Chanel Lewis left her in the bushes for the bugs and animals to ravage. She was discovered face down in the dirt 4 hours later. Number 7. Pushed onto the tracks. A New York City homeless man has been charged with murdering a woman at a subway station. The victim, 40-year-old Michelle Alyssa Go, was waiting for the southbound R train at 9:40 a.m. when the attack happened. The homeless man approached Michelle, gave her a hard shove just as the train was coming, and she was obliterated instantly. According to New York Police Department Commissioner Keaton Sewell, the incident was unprovoked and the victim hadn't even interacted with the killer. It was completely random and spontaneous. The killer, later identified by the cops as 61-year-old Simon Martial, fled the scene as quick as he could, but later turned himself over to the transit police. He's been charged with murder, but when we look at his rap sheet, it doesn't come as a huge surprise. Simon was homeless. He often loitered in New York City's dank subway stations, and the police knew of his vast criminal history. He had multiple prior arrests. He was on parole at the time of the killing, and the cops had already documented at least 3 emotionally disturbed encounters with the man. Clearly, he was not somebody who should have been free to roam the subway stations, where people can so easily be pushed in front of the trains. Number 6. One embarrassed daughter. Boston mom Beth Davis was so desperate to get her daughter a date that she put up a billboard in Times Square. The sign, which was absolutely massive, read, "Date my daughter." And of course, it was accompanied by a picture of her 30-year-old daughter, Molly. It even had a link to her dating profile. If you thought 1 or 2 of your friends seeing your dating profile by accident was embarrassing, imagine the entirety of New York City seeing a billboard put up by your mother. According to Beth, she put up the billboard because she's desperate for her daughter to find love before she dies. Sadly, Beth was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in 2020, and it has already spread into her bones. She may not be around much longer, and she wants to see her daughter settle down with a wonderful man before her time comes. As for Molly, she's taking it all in stride. The one thing that's for sure is that if Molly was having a hard time finding a date before, she shouldn't now. Literally everyone in New York City has a direct link to her dating profile. What would your reaction be if your mom plastered your face on a billboard in the middle of Times Square just so you could get a date? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. Number 5. The worst NYPD officer. A man from New York City, a former NYPD officer, has been charged for the murder of his own mother. As if matricide wasn't bad enough, he attacked her with a machete to the point that he nearly cut her head clean off. According to the district attorney, her head was hanging on barely by a thread by the time he was done. This is the worst NYPD officer ever, at least when it comes to motherly abuse. His name was Osvaldo Diaz, 46 years old. The attack took place inside the apartment he was sharing with his mom, above a beauty salon in Queens. It was Osvaldo's sister who came across the murder scene. She was supposed to go out with their mother, but she wasn't answering her calls. Worried, she got the landlord to let her into the apartment. That was when she found her mom wrapped in a bloody sheet. Her brother had already fled. It looked like he quit halfway through trying to dispose of the body and made a break for it. The killer went on the run for a week before he was finally apprehended in New Jersey. But he never has given a motive for why he tried to decapitate his mom. He stuck to his innocence this whole time, claiming the police have the wrong guy. But according to the victim's family, he was known for outbursts of violence. Nobody is all that surprised that he finally killed someone. Number 4. Murder at Burger King. In New York City, nobody wants to work the night shift. 19-year-old Crystal Byron Neves was one of these people. She was extremely nervous to begin working night shifts at Burger King. She asked the manager if she could work days because she was worried about her safety, but she was told to suck it up in so many words. Just after she started work, Crystal was the victim of a mad gunman. He walked into the fast food restaurant at about 1 o'clock in the morning on January 9th, pointed the gun, and demanded cash. This is according to the New York City Police Department. The teenager got the key to open the cash register. She handed the guy $100, and then he pulled the trigger anyway. He blasted the girl in the torso, turning her insides into scrambled eggs. He also pistol-whipped a male customer and punched the manager in the face before fleeing. The murderer was arrested soon after, a man named Winston Glynn, but the teen didn't make it. She was rushed to the local hospital and pronounced dead. In this shocking and terrifying case, the girl's worst nightmare actually came true. Number 3. Killer NYC Teen. A teenager from New York City has been given 14 years to life in prison for the brutal murder of a student, Tessa Majors. Rashawn Weaver was only 14 years old when he and 2 other teenage friends tried to rob Tessa as she walked through Manhattan's Morningside Park back in December of 2019. It was only supposed to be a robbery, but it got completely out of hand. Rashawn ended up stabbing the young woman to death over her iPhone. During court proceedings, it was revealed how Tessa held onto her iPhone for dear life when Rashawn and his friends tried to take it from her. It's not the victim's fault that she was stabbed to death, but she may have gotten away alive if she had just given up her phone. Instead, she clung to the thing as if it were her baby, and to lose it would be to lose a piece of her soul. But according to her family, there was a good reason Tessa didn't want to give up her phone. It contained all the songs she'd been recording on it for the past 3 years. The songs were stored nowhere else but on her phone. So in a way, losing her phone really would have been like losing a legitimate piece of her soul. In the end, Tessa lost her phone and her life. And it gets even more horrifying. Rashawn Weaver and his friends had set out that night intent on mugging someone in the park. They tried a few times, but failed. Finally, they set their sights on a single woman jogging by herself. Rashawn ran up behind her, kicked her in the back, and then screamed at her as she lay on the ground in pain. When she didn't give up the phone, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her 4 times. Each time, he thrust the knife with enough force to push feathers out of her coat to float off in the night air. Number 2. Bad Brooklyn Funeral Home. One woman in Brooklyn is suing a local funeral home for mishandling her dead mom's body. Her name is Dawn Morales, and she says that she paid R.G. Ortiz Funeral Home to cremate her mother, but she never received the ashes. This is because the funeral home accidentally buried her mom on Hart Island in the Portis Field, a gravesite reserved for unclaimed bodies. Naturally, Dawn is devastated. She told local news that the funeral home treated her mother like nobody. They literally buried her in the worst place imaginable, a neglected gravesite filled with nameless, unclaimed corpses, like those the police find floating in the river. When Dawn reached out to the funeral home, she didn't get many answers. It wasn't until she made a huge stink about it that they finally agreed to get the body back and properly cremate it. But after 4 months, she has still not received the ashes of her mother. If you ask me, this is a perfect example of just how chaotic and crazy life in New York City can be. They can't even keep track of their dead. Number 1. The Times Square Killer. Richard Francis Cunningham is also known as the Times Square Torso Ripper, or just the Times Square Killer. He was a savage serial killer from between 1967 and 1980, murdering a minimum of 11 young women and girls. He earned his nickname after leaving 2 of his victims dismembered and decapitated in a hotel just beside Times Square. This was in December of 1979. He picked up Dita Goodzari, a sex worker in her 20s, and a teenage girl who has still never been identified. He took them to the hotel, tortured them, and then cut off their heads and hands and set their bodies on fire. He fled the scene with the heads and hands, which police have still never recovered. This was one of the sickest guys who ever existed, and yet nobody has ever heard of him. Guys like Jeffrey Dahmer and John Wayne Gacy get all the attention, but Richard Cunningham really was a devil in New York City. He was finally caught on May 22nd, 1980. The cops found him in a New Jersey hotel, in the middle of torturing a teenage girl whom he'd lured from NYC. The cops caught him in the act and locked him up. He was convicted of 5 murders, although he's confessed to somewhere between 85 and 100. He's actually still alive, currently incarcerated in the Southwood State Prison in New Jersey.
Number 10. A Bad Delivery. A California woman was killed by her ex-boyfriend as she was trying to deliver food for DoorDash. It was a Sunday afternoon in Milpitas, and Christina Raymond was going about her life as normal. She was on the phone with her boyfriend, Leonard Pearson, when she became aware that somebody was following her. She tried to figure out who it was, and eventually managed to catch a glimpse of the man in her rearview mirror. She was shocked to see that it was her ex, 42-year-old Anthony John Juco. Anthony just so happens to be a registered sex offender in the state of California. Obviously, he's not the kind of guy you want to be followed by. Understanding that she could be in danger, Christina drove to the police station, but she pulled up and stopped on the wrong side of the building. At this point, Anthony was able to catch up to her. She thought she was safe parked outside of a cop station, but not so much. Anthony got into her car and stabbed her repeatedly until she was dead. The cops only figured out what was happening when they received a call from a concerned party who said Christina should have arrived at the police station. When they went outside the wrong end of the building, they saw Anthony pulling out of the parking lot in Christina's vehicle. They then got into a high-speed chase. The chase ended with Anthony crashing. The police surrounded the vehicle, arrested the maniac, and discovered Christina's corpse, mutilated in the back seat. Number 9. Killing the whole family. In an insane fit of rage after being dumped, a man from Oshawa, Ontario, beat a woman to death and killed her 2 kids. This is one of the most horrendous things you're probably going to hear today, so nobody's judging if you get a bit queasy. 39-year-old Krashimira Pejanovsky, her 15-year-old son Roy, and a 13-year-old daughter, Finalia, were all brutally slaughtered. The man responsible is Corey Fenn, who has since pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder, but he's definitely guilty. There's no doubt about it. Corey Fenn was dating Krashimira on and off again for quite some time, but she finally worked up the courage to call it off and break all ties with the man. This pushed Corey into such a horrible rage that he went out and purchased himself as much cocaine as he could afford. At least, that's what he says. He claims that the drugs sent him into a cocaine psychosis. All jacked up, he drove to his ex-girlfriend's house and beat her until she wasn't recognizable anymore. Then, still possessed by his bloodthirst, he attacked her son and strangled him on the floor of a bedroom. Then he stalked down the stairs to the basement and stabbed the 13-year-old girl to death. The only inconsistency in this story is that Corey was on cocaine. No physical evidence was found that he was intoxicated at the time of the murders. Crown attorney Mike Newell told the court that the brutality of Corey's attack shows his intent to kill. He went into the house to murder, and that's exactly what he did. Number 8. Abandoned in a rural field. Hunter Van Mackelberg was 19 years old when he killed Calix Langenau. It was a classic case of teenage love affair gone horribly wrong. The story starts in 2017 when Hunter was dating a girl named SB and Calix was dating a girl named Madeline. But by the summer of 2018, the couple had split apart and switched. The 2 teenage boys only knew each other because they were dating one another's ex. It was a pretty normal situation for teenagers to be in. Throughout 2019 and 2020, as Calix continued to date SB, Hunter became increasingly jealous and angry. Calix had the windows of his car shot out, and he thought that Hunter and Madeline were responsible. It became clear the couple was out to get him. He became so afraid for his life that he took a job in a different province because he needed to get out of town. In February of 2020, Calix and SB were broken up, but Hunter and Madeline were now living together. On Valentine's Day, Calix must have been feeling lonely. He reached out to his ex-girlfriend Madeline. They made plans to meet up at the local Costco parking lot at 1:30 in the morning. They met, but Hunter had followed his girlfriend there. Hunter forced Calix to get behind the wheel and drive them to a rural field. Once there, Hunter killed Calix execution style with a 12-gauge shotgun for trying to mess around with his girl. Calix must have thought he was reconnecting with his ex, but the truth was that she helped orchestrate his brutal murder. It was all just one big, cruel attack. Number 7. Held hostage. A woman in Portland was killed by her ex-boyfriend after he escaped from federal custody and went on a mad rampage. Her name was Mariela Gonzalez Rocha. She was discovered dead in her apartment after a bizarre standoff with the police, in which her ex shot over 30 rounds at officers from inside the apartment. Mariella called the police at about 3:30 in the afternoon and claimed she was being held hostage in her own apartment. The dispatcher heard her pleading to someone to leave her alone, and then a male picked up the phone. The guy said his name was Jason, that the woman they just talked to was high on drugs, and that nobody had any guns. The call then ended abruptly. This was way too suspicious for police not to report to the scene. It also helped that a few minutes later, neighbors in the same apartment complex began calling the cops when they heard gunshots going off. For 10 hours, the cops tried to get into the apartment. They broke the windows, they tried using a robot, and they threw in tear gas. The escaped ex-boyfriend, Devontae Donahue, had gunned down Mariella before the police ever managed to get inside. They found her lying face down on the floor, dead from a single gunshot. And all because her ex-boyfriend managed to wiggle his way out of a Portland Federal Reentry Center. He was doing 9 years in prison for sex trafficking a minor. But when he was transferred, he managed to escape by cutting off his GPS ankle bracelet and making a break for it. Number 6. Shot in the back. Eva Morera Ulloa was shot in the back by her ex-boyfriend. According to the Costa Rica police, her body was discovered in the town of Barva de Heredia just hours before they arrested the prime suspect. Eva was a student, she was a young mother, and she was a vocal activist involved in bringing more attention to victims of gender violence. You might say she was a pretty good person, but all that came to an end at the hands of a man she had dated. It's sadly ironic that Eva was searching for a way to end femicides in Costa Rica, then became the victim of one herself. Her killer is Randall Garita Oviedo, and he's since been sentenced to 35 years in prison. It's been difficult to pin down a precise motive for the killing. The plaintiff lawyer involved in the case said that Randall had established psychological entrapment of Eva, but that influence ended after they broke up. The most likely scenario is that Randall was upset and jealous that his girlfriend was able to move on without him. And so he did the only thing he could think of. He removed her from the world forever. Number 5. The worst anesthetist. An anesthetist from Baltimore made a terrifying confession on Facebook after shooting his ex-girlfriend in the head. His name was Ray J. Black, and he had worked as a nurse practitioner anesthetist until just before the murders. He was fired for a workplace dispute. It was from there that his life kind of spiraled out of control. He took to Facebook Live to announce to the entire world that he had just killed his ex-girlfriend, Tara LeBang, and that he was going after his ex-wife next. In his horrifying confession, he said shooting his ex in the head felt like a dream and that he never thought he would be that guy. He then said that since he started, he might as well finish it. The next person that made him really depressed in his life was his ex-wife. As he recorded the video, he was standing in front of his ex-wife's house. He showed her front porch. She could be seen opening the door and then quickly closing it, and then he went in for the kill. He forced his way into her house. Before the video ended, his last words heard were, "Today's the day." Seconds later, his ex-wife Wendy was dead. Is this the most disturbing thing you've ever heard being live streamed on Facebook? If you knew anything worse that happened on Facebook Live, be sure to mention it in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Number 4. The Last Red Light. A jealous man in North Philadelphia convinced 2 of his friends to assassinate his ex-girlfriend. Chong Lin Dan was arrested and charged with being the mastermind behind the murder plot that saw Ebony Pack, a 30-year-old nurse, get gunned down at a red light in Lansdale in November of 2020. He didn't pull the trigger himself, cowardly convinced 2 of his friends to do it for him. According to the girl Ebony started seeing after she dumped Chong, he was verbally and physically abusive throughout their relationship. This is partly why it ended in July of 2020. After Ebony started seeing the new girl, Chong became extremely jealous. He was angry, he threatened her, and he plotted to kill her. Chong had his friends Vance and Dan, along with a third gunman, as she was driving to her girlfriend's house in Landale. When she got to the stoplight, they pulled up beside her and opened fire. When the police tried to track these guys down, 2 had vanished. They managed to arrest Vance and charge him with murder, but the others had already gotten on a flight to Honduras and have yet to return to the States. A warrant for their arrest has been issued, but the cops haven't been able to find any information as to their whereabouts. Right now, Chong and Vance are the only ones in custody. Number 3. Left in a suitcase. Valerie Reyes was stuffed in a suitcase and then dumped in the woods and left to suffocate. It was her ex-boyfriend, Javier de Silva Rojas, who committed the despicable crime. To understand what happened, we need to go back to January of 2018. The pair met on the internet and started dating. They had an affair for about 3 months, but it ended because Javier was more interested in being romantic than Valerie was. This led to tension between them because he wanted things to get serious and she just wanted to mess around. The two broke up and Javier became depressed. On January 30th, 2019, Valerie didn't show up to work. She hadn't been seen for 2 days and people were worried. She was working her dream job at a bookstore in New York, while Javier worked at a restaurant as an illegal immigrant whose visa expired. On February 5th, Valerie's corpse was discovered by some highway workers in Connecticut. They found a red suitcase in the forest about 20 feet from the road with her mangled body inside of it. She had been bound with duct tape and beaten, but was still alive when left in the woods. She died a slow and agonizing death in that suitcase, all because Javier was distraught that she no longer wanted to see him. Number 2. Thanksgiving Day killing. On Thanksgiving Day, a woman in Madison County, an advocate for the victims of domestic violence, became a victim herself. A call came into the sheriff's office at about 1 p.m. in the afternoon, reporting a possible death. When first responders and deputies arrived at the address, they discovered Leslie Reeves and Christopher J. Smith shot and bleeding on the floor. Smith suffered injuries and was rushed to the hospital but survived, while Leslie was pronounced dead on the spot. Leslie was a respected member of the community. She operated a small business in which she taught women to do yoga, to stay fit, and to practice self-defense. The investigation into her death revealed that her ex-boyfriend, Robert Tarr, had been harboring some animosity against the woman. He's currently on trial for her murder. During the most recent court appearance, it came out that Robert had texted a close friend that he suspected Leslie was on a date with a dude. Eyewitnesses say his vehicle was spotted several times moving between his home, about an hour away, and the place where Leslie was murdered. It seems that he had followed her on a date she was having with a man, then broke into the house and killed her, execution style. Before he fled the house, he turned the gun on her date and tried to kill him too. The date, Christopher Smith, is still in the hospital in serious condition. The trial for Robert Tarr is also still ongoing. Right now, he's sitting in jail waiting for a decision to be made in February. His fate now lies in the hands of a jury. And number 1, failed property dispute. Wajiha Swati was a citizen of the United States of America of Pakistani origin. She went to Pakistan in the middle of October to settle a property dispute that she was having with her ex-husband, Rizwan Habib. The day she arrived in the city, Rizwan picked her up from the airport, but he never took her to the hotel or somewhere to settle the dispute. He instead abducted her with the help of his father and a third man. Together, they brutally murdered the woman and ditched her corpse at a house owned by one of Rizwan's employees. It's not clear what the property dispute was exactly, but we now know it was more of an excuse for her ex-husband to get her out of the U.S. to Pakistan. She fell for the trick and was killed on the same day she arrived. The cops eventually found her body in the house. They connected the 3 men to the murder, and they've all been arrested.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather be broken up with at your birthday party or catch your partner making out with someone else on the Jumbotron at a sports game? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.